we're going to be talking about the cognitive learning theory. This is one of the theories, depending which exam board you're doing, of 3 theories of learning. The other theories are the operant conditioning theory of learning, and the other one is the observational learning theory. But this is the cognitive learning theory. It's a relatively shorter theory, but there's a couple of key points that we want to make sure we get our heads around. And the way in which we're going to start doing this is looking at the key terminology. What I like to do is give you an overview of the key points that you need to make sure that you're talking about, and certainly considering when you get a question on this theory, the cognitive learning theory. So let's have a look at those, and then we'll go in a bit more detail into each one of them and piece them together so you get an understanding. So this is what we're talking about. Initially, we're talking about a learning theory. So the learner works out for themselves, they problem solve how to do the skill. And the way that they do that is through this concept of insight learning. Now, don't worry if you've not come across this idea of insight learning before, but basically it means, if we look over here at the light bulb here, it's about having this kind of eureka moment. I get it. I understand what to do. And then everything fits into place. So that's what that's about, that idea of insight learning. Again, we'll come to it a little bit more. But coupled with that, and really crucially, is that the learner is thinking about what's required. So linking back there to the problem solving, it's thinking about what's required and then understanding that, again, the insight learning. I get it. Right? I understand what to do. I've thought about this. Now I've got it. And therefore, that's why it's called the cognitive learning theory, because as we remember, cognition means thinking about. So that's why we talk about it's called the cognitive learning theory. Now, with that as well, just some background really, but it's useful to know that the Gestaltist approach came from a philosopher or researcher, a German gentleman, who came up with this concept of this whole concept of thinking and understanding and insight learning. And his name is Gestalt, and therefore this is referred to as the Gestaltist approach. Now, don't worry over much about the name if you can't remember it, but if you can, it would be useful for you, because often it's on mark schemes. Just as a little piece of factual information, this is the Gestaltist approach. But with that, he was basically saying this is about whole learning. We put it into a sport and PE context. This is about learning as a whole. This is about learning the skill in its entirety. So an example might be learning to swim, the front crawl, you're doing your leg action, your arm action, your breathing all in one go. And if we go back up to here, maybe there's some thinking about that's required what to do initially and an understanding of how to put it all together. Moving forward, the theory also suggests that we can problem solve, we can understand what's required based upon any previous experience we've had of something similar. And actually that is often the way that we work, when we face anything for the first time, is right, how have we seen this, or where have we seen this before in the past? And we draw upon what's in our long-term memory. And we can think, right, I've seen something similar to this, not exactly the same, but something similar to this. And at that time, I used some of the things from my long-term memory, which I can employ in this particular case. In a moment, I'll show you an example which indicates that really, really well. Okay, and then the last one here, key concept, is intervening. Let's start again here. The last one here is intervening variables. Now, apart from being difficult to say, what intervening variables basically means is all of the little parts that make up the situation, the problem to be solved. Any contributing factor that you have to think about, you have to take into consideration, and then you are aware of or you use in order to learn the skill, to carry out the skill. Okay, and again, in a practical context in a moment, I'll show you how this works. But those are the 6 points there that are really, 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 really important. So I just want to recap on this. If ever you get a question on the cognitive learning theory, then really we should be thinking about problem solving. If you use this word, insight learning, then you're way on the way to getting some good marks. If you're talking about thinking and understanding, that's really, really important. Probably this bit "and" should be in bold. It's not just thinking about it, it's thinking and understanding. And that links with what Gestalt's there. This is his theory, and that's the whole concept, is whole learning. You're learning something as a whole, thinking about it, understanding it, and learning about it as a whole. And with that, then, as we've said, you have your previous experience, your long-term memory you draw upon in order to try to solve the problem or learn what's required. And to finish, it's those intervening variables, those factors that we need to take into account in order to help us to learn the skill or carry out the movement. Practical example coming up right now. Let's use, for example, the golf putt out of the bunker here. So before we play the video, let's just have a look at the things that we've just talked about. So cognitive learning theory talks about problem solving. So in this case, obviously the ball's down here. The golfer's got to hit the ball somewhere such that ultimately it goes into the hole, which is here. You can see the flag, or as close as possible. So that's the problem to be solved. And so the golfer here is thinking, right, well, what have I been in a situation like this before? He's going to be using some previous experience, anything from his long-term memory, to help him. And as you'll see as we play through the video just now, you'll see that he's thinking and understanding what's required to do, what he's got to do, and he's just teeing things up. And some of the things we'll be looking at in just a moment, he's taking into consideration. So let's just pause it again. Just before he hits it, he's having a look again. Now he's got to take into account those intervening variables that we talked about. So let's just identify some of those things. One of them might be, well, how far away is the ball from the pin? So there's the distance from the pin that's important. Also, if we note here, we've got this lip here. So he's got to make sure he hits it such that it goes over this lip. There's a curve here, and then we can see the pins there. So there's a bit of a gradient in the slope down that way. So he's got to think about where he's got to hit the ball, how high he's got to hit the ball, over the rise there, and such that it lands on the green and rolls back down towards the pin. So the height of the lip's important. The lay of the ball in the sand, it's looking pretty true there, which means he can get underneath it. It's not too deep, but that's important. He's got to take into account. Also, which putt to use. Is he using a sand wedge? Is he using another type of putt? And how hard he's got to hit the ball, how he's positioning himself. All of these things, including the grip there, are relevant. Now, another example we could use for whole learning is the breaststroke. As you can see here, this skill is being carried out as a whole, so perfect example of whole learning. And you can see the lad has worked out through his understanding and thinking about what to do that he is using his arms and his legs in such a way that he's doing a pretty decent job of the breaststroke. So another simple example for you could be using the breaststroke, which is being learnt as a whole, so whole learning.